The crowd is already screaming before you even see the cauldron. The noise hits first, a wave of voices crashing together, hungry for something terrible. Then comes the heat. It rolls across the square in thick, suffocating bursts, carrying the smell of fire, iron, and something far worse. You try to speak. You try to explain. It was just a joke. But your voice disappears into the roar of thousands. No one is listening. This is not an execution. This is a spectacle. The guards drag you forward. Your feet scrape across the wooden platform as the iron chains tighten around your arms. Below you, the water is already boiling, thick bubbles rising and bursting like the surface of hell itself. A man will later write that your scream was mighty loud. He will not write what came after. He will not write about the 2 hours. The 2 endless hours of pain that no human being was ever meant to endure. And all of this, for a joke. A foolish, stupid, careless joke. But in Tudor England, even a joke could kill you. And in your case, it did. Years earlier, far from the chaos of Smithfield, life inside the household of John Fisher moved with quiet tension. England itself was changing. The king, Henry VIII, wanted to end his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. He demanded freedom to remarry. He demanded the blessing of the church. But the Pope refused. And Fisher refused with him. He stood alone against the king, defending the Queen, defending the old order, even as the ground beneath England began to crack. That kind of defiance did not go unnoticed. In Fisher's house, fear lived in every corner. Servants whispered when they thought no one was listening. Guards searched every visitor. Every letter, every package, every stranger could be a threat. Because in those days, there was a weapon more terrifying than the sword. Poison. It required no army. No confrontation. No query. Just a single moment. A pinch of powder. Into a bowl. Into a cup. And death would follow hours later. Silent. Invisible. Certain. Even kings feared it. Food became suspicion. Every meal became a gamble. Noble households hired tasters, men whose only job was to risk dying first. But even that was not enough. Some poisons worked slowly, waiting patiently inside the body before striking. There was no defense, no warning, only fear. And in Fisher's household, that fear was growing. Threats had already begun to arrive. Crude drawings of hanging ropes. Messages promising death. Once, even a dead animal delivered as a warning. Someone wanted Fisher gone. And in the center of it all, stood a man no one would have ever suspected. Richard Roos. A cook. A servant. A man whose entire life revolved around fire, pots, and simple meals. He was not powerful. He was not political. He was not important. He was just there. Invisible. And in a dangerous world, invisible men are often the easiest to use. February 18th, 1531. It began like any other morning. The kitchen was alive with sound, wood cracking in the fires, metal clanging, water simmering. The smell of porridge filled the air, simple and warm, meant to feed both guests and the poor waiting outside. Roos moved through his work without thinking. This was routine, safe, familiar. He stirred the pot slowly, watching the thick mixture bubble and rise. Then, he reached for something. A small amount of powder. Nothing unusual. Nothing dangerous. Or so he believed. Later, he would say it was meant to be a joke. Just something harmless, a way to cause discomfort, embarrassment. Nothing more than crude humor in a stressful household. A servant's prank. But the powder was not harmless. And once it touched the porridge, everything changed. The food was served. Inside the hall, guests sat down to eat, speaking quietly, unaware of what had just been set before them. Outside, the poor gathered at the gates, accepting bowls with grateful hands. For a brief moment, everything was normal. Then the first man collapsed. His face twisted in pain. His body folded inward as if something inside him had snapped. Then another. And another. The room exploded into chaos. Chairs fell. Voices rose. Panic spread faster than fire. Outside, the same horror unfolded. People dropped into the street, clutching their stomachs. Some vomited violently. Others screamed as their bodies convulsed. No one understood what was happening. Only that something was terribly, horribly wrong. 17 people were poisoned. 2 would die. And in that moment, suspicion turned instantly toward the kitchen. Toward the man who had prepared the food. Richard Roos. When they questioned him, his answer was simple. Too simple. I meant it as a joke. A joke. 2 people were dead. 17 more were fighting for their lives. And the man responsible claimed it was an accident. But there was more. Roos said he had not acted alone. A stranger, he claimed, had given him the powder. A man he barely knew. A man who told him it was harmless. A man who vanished the moment everything went wrong. Was it true? Or was it a lie, to escape blame? No one could prove either. There was no evidence. No witnesses. No way to know. But in Tudor England, truth was not always required. Confession was. And confession could be forced. Inside the walls of the Tower of London, Roos was stretched, broken, and pushed to the edge of madness. The rack pulled his limbs until joints cracked. Pain became constant, unavoidable, endless. And still, he repeated the same story. A joke. A stranger. A terrible mistake. But far beyond the prison walls, the situation had already grown much bigger than one man. Because the king had heard. And for Henry VIII, this was not just a crime. It was a threat. He already lived surrounded by enemies. He feared betrayal, feared assassination, and above all, he feared poison. Because poison could reach anyone, even a king. And now, in his own kingdom, a man had poisoned food. That could not be allowed. Not just punished, but made into an example. Henry wanted something unforgettable. Something so terrifying that no one would ever dare repeat such an act. So he did something extraordinary. He changed the law. Not for the future. For the past. Parliament declared that poisoning was not just murder. It was treason. A crime against the crown itself. And the punishment for treason would not be mercy. It would be terror. Henry chose something new. Something no one in England had ever seen before. Boiling alive. A punishment designed not just to kill, but to be remembered. Smithfield was chosen for the execution. A place where people bought food, now turned into a place where a man would die because of it. A massive iron cauldron was built. Fires were prepared beneath it. Water was poured in, bucket by bucket, until it began to boil. The day arrived. April 5th, 1531. Thousands gathered. Some out of curiosity, some out of fear, some simply to watch. When Roos was brought forward, he was barely able to stand. The torture had already taken its toll. But the worst was still ahead. They chained him, lifted him, and slowly lowered him toward the water. The moment his body touched the surface, his scream cut through the entire square. It was not human. It was something deeper. Something primal. Something that made even the crowd step back in horror. But they did not leave. They watched. For 2 hours, they watched. As the punishment continued. As the man disappeared into steam, into pain, into something no words could fully describe. And when it was finally over, the crowd was silent. They had come for entertainment. They left with something else. Fear. The king had made his point. But the story did not end there. Years later, another person would face the same fate. Another boiling. Another spectacle. And then, quietly, the law was removed. Even in a brutal age, it was too much. Too cruel. Too extreme. And yet, the memory remained. A reminder of what happens when fear controls power. When justice becomes spectacle. When one mistake, one moment, one joke can lead to something far worse than death. Because in the end, Richard Roos did not just die. He became a warning. A story told in whispers. A legend burned into history. And a reminder that sometimes the most horrifying punishments are the ones created by fear itself. The power she held was absolute. But absolute power never remains unchallenged. Behind the marble walls of the palace, whispers had already begun to spread. Servants talked in hushed tones. Guards exchanged uneasy glances. And the nobles, they watched. Because what happened in private chambers never stayed private for long. At first, it was rumors. Stories of strange requests. Unusual punishments. Late-night summons that no one refused, but many feared. Some said she was simply indulging in luxury. Others said something far darker. Because those who entered her chambers did not always return the same. A young officer, once proud and confident, emerged days later broken, silent, unwilling to speak of what he had witnessed. A servant girl vanished completely. No body, no explanation, just silence. And silence was often more terrifying than truth. The palace began to change. What was once a place of order slowly turned into a place of fear. People avoided eye contact. Footsteps echoed softer. And every knock on the door carried dread. Because anyone could be called next. And once called, there was no refusal. Her desires grew more extreme with time. Not just control, but domination. Not just obedience, but submission. She didn't just want loyalty. She wanted complete power over body and mind. Some historians would later try to dismiss these stories as exaggeration. But fear leaves traces. And fear was everywhere. Even among the elite. Even among those who once supported her. Because eventually, power like this creates enemies. And enemies begin to plan. Quietly. Carefully. Waiting for the perfect moment. The moment when the powerful become vulnerable. And that moment always comes. It began with distance. Trusted allies started avoiding her. Meetings became shorter. Eyes no longer held respect, but calculation. They weren't just watching her anymore. They were waiting. Because the same cruelty she used to control others could easily turn against them. And no one wanted to be next. The palace, once under her complete control, was slowly slipping from her grasp. But she didn't see it. Or maybe she refused to. Because power blinds. And when someone believes they are untouchable, that's when they are most exposed. The night everything changed was quiet. Too quiet. No music. No celebration. No movement in the halls. Only shadows. And footsteps that did not belong. Those who had once bowed before her now moved with a different purpose. Not to serve, but to end what they feared. There was no grand confrontation. No warning. Just a sudden shift from control to collapse. Because when power falls, it falls fast. The same walls that protected her now trapped her. The same silence she used to control others now surrounded her. And for the first time, she felt it. Fear. The fear she had created in others now turned back on her. History doesn't always record what happened next. Some say she was removed quietly. Others say she was made to suffer. In ways she once made others suffer. But one thing is certain. Her story didn't end in glory. It ended in shadows. In whispers. In warnings. Because history remembers power. But it never forgets cruelty. And the darker the actions, the longer the echo. Even centuries later, we still talk about her. Not for what she built. Not for what she achieved. But for what she did, behind closed doors. And that is the true legacy of fear. Power can make someone remembered. But only their actions decide how.